What would you do if the person you trusted most laughed and said, "He'll never leave me"? This isn't just betrayal. It's a story of love turned weapon, lies spun like currency, and revenge delivered with precision. In today's video, you'll witness how one man's loyalty became the very shield his wife used to deceive him, until the truth shattered her perfect image. Stay until the end because the twist isn't the exposure itself. It's the life rebuilt after destruction. You're watching Cheating Stories 7. If you love stories filled with betrayal, drama, and unforgettable revenge, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's step into the story. She said I'd never leave, but divorce and revenge shattered her perfect image. The pop-up market glowed between two half-renovated warehouses, lit by string lights that tangled with corrugated shadows. Marissa stood under a cheap ring light, live-streaming a thrift haul to a chat that moved faster than the night breeze. Her laugh didn't sound like performance. It sounded like the room remembering its own brightness. I bought a chipped mug I didn't need just to justify standing there. When she glanced up, the lens forgot her and found me. "He's the reason I'm keeping this," she said, raising a denim jacket 2 sizes too big. We both laughed, and in that laughter it felt like a door opening. We dated like people who had already tasted pain and decided not to waste each other's time. We said what we meant. We refused to recruit friends as juries. We agreed that silence was not a weapon and forgiveness was not amnesia. On Sundays, we hunted yard sales, building a life out of other people's almosts. If a chair wobbled, we steadied it. If a shelf sagged, we learned anchor screws. She documented the wins with quick clips. I held the lamp and tried not to blink. Yet the moments I loved most never made her feed. A quiet breakfast, her head resting on my shoulder while pasta boiled, a sleepy apology about dishes that ended with us washing them together anyway. We kept the wedding small. No vendors, no hashtags, no curated spectacle. Just a courthouse, a park, and a cheap bottle whose label peeled under sweaty thumbs. She cried, and I did too, soft, grateful tears. Later, we folded the suit and dress into a plastic bin, treating them not as costumes for a single episode, but as tools we might use again one day. When my team approved a 3-week remote schedule, I imagined evening walks and deep exhales between deadlines. She imagined content possibilities I didn't yet understand. We promised to protect the part of us the camera could never reach. The first months in the apartment felt like a fairy tale scaled down to a salary. Pasta eaten standing up. A couch so forgiving it taught us new ways to slouch. Plants that survived only because we watered them on calendar reminders. We mispainted one wall, more mint than sage, and agreed to love it like a scrappy pet. We touched in passing. Small inventory checks, that meant. We are still here, still choosing. She teased that my spreadsheets would outlive us. I said her laugh would, and meant it. Work remained demanding. I chased deadlines through dashboards while she chased daylight through product shots. She grew an audience by noticing ordinary things and naming them well. A stain became a story about second chances. A coupon code sounded like generosity. At night, she edited on the couch, her knees pressed against mine, blue light pooling across her arms. I read papers about models and pretended I understood everything. Between us, comfort settled like a blanket that knew where the cold spots were. We drafted rules and taped them inside a cabinet where only we would see them. Say the hard thing before the easy lie. Ask for help before resentment makes you clever. No jokes about leaving, the world does that enough already. When one of us shut down, the other would knock twice and wait. It felt practical, almost boring, and that practicality was the sexiest thing I'd ever known. We were trying to be adults, and for a while we were succeeding. Her following jumped. A skincare brand noticed and reached out with what sounded like a door opening. She took the call at the kitchen table, pacing as she mouthed numbers with her free hand. Afterward, she collapsed onto the rug, laughing that we could finally replace the wobbling desk. We high-fived like kids who had found a dollar bill on the sidewalk. I told her I was proud. She filmed a short clip about gratitude that performed better than expected. I pretended not to notice the way attention gathered around her like weather. At night, when the ring light cooled and the plants exhaled, she laid her head on my chest and counted my heartbeats like a game. We made plans that were more habit than ambition. A road trip postponed for a cheaper month, a bookshelf I swore I'd build, dinners with friends we missed. The toothbrushes leaned together in their cup like co-conspirators. In bed, we promised again to become the kind of couple we used to envy, the ones who held their line without spectacle. I believed the marriage was a harbor I could finally trust. The chapter closed on our honeymoon montage. The mint wall, the stubborn plants, the new desk that no longer wobbled, two toothbrushes tilting toward each other as if they had news to share. Beneath it all, a softer promise breathed. We will not become the couples we used to judge. I thought marriage was a harbor I could finally trust. But remote work shifted that harbor into something stranger. An apartment split into two stages. On one side was my corner office, dashboards glowing, headphones clamped, the steady hum of a second monitor. On the other side, Marissa's domain, the ring light buzzing, the tripod perched at odd angles, her laughter rehearsed into the lens of a phone. The distance between us wasn't measured in square feet. It was measured in clicks. The soft snap of her laptop lid closing when I walked by, the subtle flick of her phone screen turned face down, the sigh of a collapsing tab that seemed too eager to hide. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. After all, influencers live inside their phones. Contracts require secrecy. Confidentiality is part of the deal. But repetition carves patterns, and when those patterns keep returning, suspicion becomes a metronome you can't silence. Over dinner, she brought up a skincare client out of nowhere, telling me about a long-term ambassador offer. Normally, she never narrated her work like this. Campaigns had always been sealed away, private. But the explanation landed too clean, too polished, as if rehearsed before I could ask a question. I nodded, chewed, tried to remind myself that trust means resisting the urge to audit every word. Still, unease clung to me like smoke that wouldn't wash out. Other details emerged. Chargers relocated to odd spots as if secrecy had logistics. Passwords changed without mention. Her laptop carried everywhere, even from one room to another, cradled like a fragile infant. Sometimes she locked the bathroom door during late-night scrolling, and I couldn't tell if she wanted privacy or if she wanted me to feel the performance of privacy. The house itself began to feel doubled. My world upstairs in numbers and deadlines, hers downstairs in glowing reels and unreadable DMs. Trust bent, not broken yet, but humming with the tight strain of a string pulled too far. I told myself I would collect patterns, not accusations. Still, deep down, a quiet voice whispered what I already knew. Every pattern was already an accusation, waiting only for proof to arrive. Doubt had been whispering for weeks, but the first real crack appeared during what was supposed to be an ordinary dinner. A small gathering of Marissa's creator friends around our slightly wobbly dining table. She had curated the menu with her usual flair. Vegan sliders plated like magazine spreads, a charcuterie board that looked better than it tasted, sparkling water poured into thrifted wine glasses. The atmosphere was easy, laughter buoyant, stories volleying back and forth like a game everyone already knew the rules to. But my eyes kept drifting to her hands. Beneath the table, Marissa's thumbs moved in sharp little bursts, screen light flickering against her lap. The rhythm was too precise to mistake for casual scrolling. Her smile arrived half a beat late, as if it had to reattach itself after every message. One friend, bold with familiarity, finally teased, "Who's keeping you so busy?" A client who can't wait for dessert. The table chuckled. Marissa's smile snapped into place, polished like an ad campaign. She answered smoothly, just a brand locking in an exclusive, tight deadlines, sensitive details. Her tone was glossy, exact, too exact. The conversation reset, but something in the room had shifted. Friends exchanged glances, the kind that said we noticed too. I tried to laugh along, but inside a fissure widened. Later, as we rinsed dishes shoulder to shoulder, she circled back without prompting. She explained again, Deliverables, budget outlines, a supposed NDA. She spoke in bullet points like a press release meant for an audience of one. This wasn't her. She never narrated the client's side unless she was steering perception. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began measuring the gap between what she offered and what could be verified. I remembered how my last relationship unraveled the same way, excuses wrapped in busyness, intimacy suffocated by plausible deniability. I told myself this time would be different, that I would not be blindsided again. That night she fell asleep with her phone dimmed on the nightstand, inches from her hand. I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, trying to tell the difference between vigilance and paranoia. Each tick of the clock sounded like rehearsal for a future I didn't want to live, but feared I already had. I told myself it wasn't betrayal to look for proof. It was prevention. After weeks of sidelong glances, over-polished excuses, and laughter that came half a second late, I needed data. Not drama, not accusations, just data. So I installed a monitoring app, perfectly legal, marketed as parental control. Audit, not ambush, I repeated like a mantra. I only wanted to settle my nerves to know whether paranoia or instinct was steering me. The first days were static. Vendor chats about shipping delays, affiliate spreadsheets, influencers negotiating cross-promotion, a fog of professional chatter so dense it made me wonder if I had gone too far. Maybe I was inventing ghosts. Maybe this time I was the one rewriting the story. But then one evening the fog parted. A male voice slipped through her speaker like it belonged there. Warm, casual, saying her name like it was a habit, Marissa. Not tentative. Not new, familiar, Ryan Carter. The name snapped in my skull, her ex, the one she swore was archived in another life. The conversation began innocuous. Work chatter about the skincare brand's campaign. Ryan's agency handling back-end logistics. Marissa positioning herself as indispensable. But then the register shifted. Logistics morphed into coded phrases, excuses for slipping away, times when I'd be out. A choreography of secrecy. And then came the sentence that detonated the room. "He'll never leave me," Marissa said, laughing softly. "He loves me too much." It wasn't loud, but it thundered in my chest. A verdict disguised as a giggle, a thesis about my predictability. I replayed it twice, hearing the subtext louder than the sound, her certainty that my devotion was her shield, that my love made me blind enough to cage myself. I pressed pause. Silence filled the room. In that silence, I realized the marriage was running on two scripts. One I inhabited, where loyalty was currency, and one she narrated elsewhere, where loyalty was leverage. So I started taking notes, timestamps, call patterns, the choreography of errands she engineered, a forgotten grocery list here. A girl's night there. I didn't confront her, not yet. Sometimes silence is the only weapon that doesn't tip the target. That night I drove aimlessly through empty streets, headlights washing the asphalt clean. The city looked colorless, as if holding its breath for the truth I was carrying. I decided then, when the truth demanded daylight, I wouldn't scream it into being. I would simply open the door and let it walk out on its own legs. Unedited, undeniable. It began with a smile too sweet to be casual. "Babe, I completely forgot the groceries for dinner. Could you run out and grab them?" She held up a short list on her phone: eggs, milk, a bottle of red, ordinary items, things we already had half of in the fridge. At the time, I noticed only her timing, not the flaw in the script. Later, I would understand it wasn't forgetfulness, it was choreography. I played the role she had written for me: keys, wallet, door, a dutiful husband exiting stage left. But instead of driving straight to the store, I circled the block and parked beneath a flickering street lamp. Almost instantly, my phone vibrated. The monitoring app came alive. Ryan's voice filled the car, casual and smug. They joked about me running errands, about time carved out perfectly. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, gripping so hard that red lines stayed long after I let go. I texted Nathan, "If you're free, bring your camera." He didn't ask questions. He never did. Within 20 minutes, he slid into the passenger seat, camera bag at his feet, expression flat but ready. Nathan had always believed in evidence. "We protect what we can look at," he once told me. Tonight he would help me look. As twilight deepened, we drove to Ryan's favorite restaurant, a trendy corner spot with glass walls designed to flatter. We found a vantage point across the street. Through the reflective windows, shapes moved, servers weaving, couples leaning close, 100 small gestures that could belong to anyone, until Marissa walked in. She scanned the room like influencers do, making sure the angle was right before she performed. Then she smiled, melting into Ryan's shoulder with practiced ease. The tilt of her head, the light touch on his sleeve, these weren't new moves, they were muscle memory. My stomach nodded, memory and future colliding all at once. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted the end of doubt, so I stepped forward just enough for her eyes to catch mine through the glass. Recognition flared across her face, ripping her script in half. She froze, caught between two worlds, the polished persona who always knew her angle and the wife who had just lost control of the frame. I didn't shout. I didn't wave. I simply stood there, steady, until her expression broke and Ryan turned to follow her gaze. Then I turned away, leaving silence, and Nathan's unblinking camera to record the rest. The night air outside felt sharp, honest in a way the restaurant lights never could. Every step back to the car was heavy but clarifying. The performance was over. The curtain had dropped. What cracked her wasn't my face through the glass. It was Nathan, steady as stone, raising his phone like a mirror that refused to blink. Marissa's instincts flared on cue. She rose from the table, smile plastered sharp, already spinning her version of the scene. "It's a client dinner," she announced too loudly for the size of the room. "Product training, a misread gesture, nothing more." Her words floated brittle and weightless above the table, but spin dies quickly when truth has hands. Ryan's palm lingered at her waist. And then the server arrived, casual as breath, setting down 2 glasses and saying, "Good to see you again." That single sentence shattered her performance more efficiently than any accusation could. I didn't shout. Shouting would have been a gift, proof for her story that I was jealous, unhinged, irrational. Instead, I gave a small nod as if confirming the end of an equation. Then I turned for the door. Outside, the air cut clean and honest. It didn't lie, didn't rearrange itself for an audience. Marissa rushed after me, heels frantic on concrete, her voice pitched high with urgency. "Wait, Ethan, please, it's not what you think. Listen, it's complicated, you don't understand." She auditioned explanations like lines from a bad script, discarding each as soon as it failed to land. Her eyes searched mine, desperate to conjure a different timeline by sheer force. Nathan stepped between us, his voice calm, almost bored. "It's on video." She stopped. The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. It was the truest sentence of the night. There was no counter script for a camera lens. I didn't speak again. Words felt both too heavy and too useless. Instead, I went home with one mission: to pack. The lease was joint, so eviction wasn't possible, but absence was. I chose carefully: documents, chargers, a week of clothes. I left the plants, the mugs, even the crooked painting we had pretended to love. Those things belonged to the version of life she had rewritten. By midnight, I was in Nathan's spare guest room. The sheets didn't match, the lamp hummed faintly, but the silence was enormous, finally wide enough to hold everything I had been swallowing. Grief sat beside relief, neither one forced to win. The first night of leaving is always the longest. The body keeps reaching for warmth that isn't there. The mind rehearses arguments that will never be spoken, but exhaustion is relentless. Eventually, I slept. Not peacefully, but completely. Abandoned narratives scream the loudest. The night after I walked out, her phone lit up like a malfunctioning beacon. Through the monitoring feed I hadn't yet disconnected, I watched the parade begin. First came disbelief. "You misunderstood, it wasn't like that." Then apology. "I should have been clearer, I hate that I hurt you." Within an hour, nostalgia weaponized itself. Old photos arrived, captions attached. "Remember us here, we were perfect." When that failed, anger pushed through. "You're overreacting. You're ruining everything for no reason." By morning, bargaining made its entrance. "Let's just talk. Ryan can vouch. I'll show you screenshots." The screenshots she sent were cherry-picked fragments of innocence, amputated of context so they could masquerade as proof. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to wound her, but because silence was the only way to starve the performance. Every response would have been another stage, another spotlight, another scene in her version of the play. Silence hardened into a boundary I hadn't realized I needed. With space came clarity. I began backing up everything that mattered: bank statements, insurance policies, leases, photos of possessions that might later be disputed. I exported chat logs not to obsess but to archive. I scheduled time with an attorney. I wanted someone fluent in law before emotion could draft my pleadings. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about structure, about building a framework strong enough to hold me when memory tried to drag me back. Meanwhile, the audience she had curated online began to fracture. Private groups buzzed with rumor. Her perfect marriage transformed overnight into a cautionary meme in corners of the internet we once laughed at together. Reputation, I learned, is both currency and debt. Once spent, it doesn't return. I didn't join the gossip. I documented instead, not for the court of public opinion, but for the real one. Facts stacked higher than feelings, and the stack steadied me. That night in Nathan's guest room, I exhaled into the silence and recognized my strategy in one measured thought. Reaction is expensive. Proof is cheap. And from now on, I would spend accordingly. It arrived like a loose thread on a dress. One tug, and the whole garment threatened to collapse. Buried among hundreds of routine pings and marketing chatter, I found the seam. A string of messages between Marissa and Ryan that shifted from professional coordination to something far more dangerous. They weren't just flirting. They were mocking the very brand that paid her bills. "This serum? Overpriced lotion," Ryan typed. Marissa answered with an emoji, then added, "Crazy how gullible they are. I say glow and they believe it." Together they riffed on customers like late-night comedians. Hashtags turned into punchlines, buyers reduced to jokes. Reading it, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. Then came the landmine, a careless aside about that stupid clause, the one forbidding personal entanglements between ambassadors and agency staff. Ryan joked that the company would drop her faster than expired toner if they ever found out. Marissa's reply was a string of laughing emojis, followed by the sentence that hollowed me out. "Good thing Ethan will never leave. He covers me." The betrayal was layered. Marriage reduced to an alibi, my trust repurposed as a shield for infidelity and fraud. I didn't exult, I calibrated. Revenge shaped like rage is messy, but truth, when documented, is sharp and silent. So I called Nathan's lawyer friend. We walked through the minefield of defamation law, asked what truth as defense really meant. His advice was simple: don't editorialize, don't dramatize, let their words speak. I compiled a dossier, screenshots with timestamps, contract snippets pulled from her email archive, still frames from Nathan's video, each piece logged, numbered, preserved. Then I drafted a quiet email to the brand's compliance department. Subject line: potential breach of contract information. The attachments sat in a neat row. No adjectives, no accusations, just facts. When I hovered over send, my hand didn't shake. It felt less like revenge and more like closing a loop she had opened long ago when she decided love could be collateral. After the email left my outbox, I leaned back in the chair. The silence around me was steady. Paperwork doesn't rage. Documents don't second-guess themselves. They simply remain. For the first time in weeks, so did I. Truth doesn't tiptoe, it runs. Within 48 hours of my email, the skincare brand issued an internal memo that leaked almost immediately. Partnership terminated due to misalignment with core values. By the end of the week, their public PR account confirmed it with a corporate polite statement sharp enough to cut. Marissa Lane, once their glowing face, was now a liability. At the same time, another fuse burned. A bystander's short clip from the restaurant, Nathan in the background, Marissa leaning into Ryan, surfaced on a small gossip forum. Within hours, drama accounts scooped it up, splicing screenshots, adding hashtags, turning suspicion into certainty. Algorithms don't care about nuance, they care about velocity. And velocity detonated the story into feeds I hadn't even known existed. Her comment section mutated in real time. First came confusion, heart emojis, disbelief, desperate compliments. Then interrogation, is this real? Who is he? Soon after, elegies, I thought you two were perfect. Love isn't real. Parasocial illusions died loudly, each follower mourning their own projection. Ryan's agency scrambled. First came a vague note about reviewing professional boundaries. Then, without announcement, his profile disappeared from their roster, marked paused pending internal investigation. The same machine that had built their relevance was now grinding them into grist. I didn't gloat. I didn't even watch it unfold directly. Nathan managed the flood of DMs like a bouncer at a door no one wanted to enter. I disabled my tags, locked down my accounts, and let privacy stretch around me like armor. The public doesn't grant you peace. It trades in spectacle. And spectacle, while explosive, has a short half-life. Still, the noise was deafening at its peak. Headlines mangled my name. Thumbnails froze Marissa mid-blink. Articles stitched fiction from fragments. Meanwhile, the real work was quieter. Property inventories, lawyer consultations, signatures moving lives forward in plain clothes while the internet screamed. I sat in Nathan's kitchen one morning, coffee cooling untouched. As notifications buzzed like hornets I refused to swat. Outside, the sky was ordinary steady. The noise was cresting. And when it finally broke, I intended to still be standing, untangled, intact, and no longer part of her performance. Consequences don't arrive one by one. They cascade. Within a week of the brand termination, 2 more sponsors pulled their contracts without fanfare. Affiliate links that once pulsed with commissions went dark, 404 standing where discount codes used to be. Even the smaller perks, clothing hauls, PR boxes, vanished. A silence settled across her channels where constant noise once lived. Friends who used to drop playful comments into her live streams drifted away. At first, they cited busy schedules. Then they stopped answering altogether, erasing themselves like people who sense a sinking ship. Family group chats swelled instead, full of advice disguised as scolding. You need to apologize better. You need to fix this. Stop blaming others. Every message piled up like sandbags against a flood she had summoned herself. Ryan fared no better. He lost his placement at the vendor. A mutual acquaintance texted me bluntly, he's radioactive. No one wants to touch him now. Marissa tried a public apology. She filmed it under poor lighting, her ring light conspicuously absent. Her words carried a practiced sincerity, but apologies without ownership sound like weather reports, technically accurate, irrelevant to those already drenched. Comments skewed hostile, too little, too late. You're sorry you got caught. Where's Ethan? Offline, she shifted tactics. Late-night voicemails landed on my phone, dipped in nostalgia. She tried to sound like the woman I had once loved, the soft humor, the little sigh before saying my name. I listened to exactly one before blocking her again. Empathy, I realized, could be relapse if left unchecked. The apartment became a mausoleum. The unplugged ring light. Boxes of PR samples stacked like monuments to a career imploded. Walking through it, I refused to play custodian of a museum built on denial. I gathered the last of my personal things, documents, a favorite book, the watch my father left me. Then I left behind a neat inventory for the court, line items, values, no anger shading the numbers. Finally, I handed the keys to a neutral third party. No dramatic confrontation, no last-minute plea. Just metal sliding across a desk, a signature, and the quiet finality of a door that would never reopen by argument. When a narrative loses control, it looks for volume. Marissa arrived at Nathan's townhouse just after sunset, headlights slicing across the lawn like a spotlight she couldn't resist. Her voice carried before her feet even touched the grass, sharp, frantic, a braid of accusation and grief pulled too tight. She screamed my name as if sheer volume could drag me back into the script she still wanted to perform. From inside, Nathan had already angled his phone against the window ledge. We didn't need dialogue, we needed record. When Marissa noticed the lens trained on her, she escalated, Performance came naturally to her, but this stage didn't allow edits. "You ruined me," she shouted, fists trembling at her sides. "You destroyed everything, my career, my life, because you couldn't handle me moving on." Her words cracked into the night, loud enough to stir porch lights across the street. Neighbors began to gather, drawn like moths to the unraveling of her image. Then came the violence. She grabbed a landscaping stone and hurled it at the front window, spiderwebbing the glass with a pale fracture. Nathan flinched but kept filming. The sound made the night hold its breath. She pivoted next to my car, pulled a key or maybe a blade across the paint, dragging a shriek of metal that felt like punctuation. A long, deliberate scar from front to back. I stepped outside, but only once. Not to argue, not to plead. I let the air still before speaking a single word that mattered. "Leave." The syllable carried more weight than all the frantic explanations she had screamed in the weeks before. It wasn't anger, it was closure. For a brief moment, even she seemed to understand. Her eyes darted to the neighbors, to the phones now lifted by strangers capturing their own evidence. She hissed something I didn't bother to catch, then stormed away, her car fishtailing into the dark. Tires screamed. The night exhaled. Minutes later, sirens bled into the distance, red and blue washing over the cracked glass with indifferent light. Nathan narrated calmly into his phone, timestamping the damage. I sat on his couch afterward, shaking but unbroken. Nathan made tea like it was just weather, loud, violent, inconvenient but temporary. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, an antiseptic kind of truth. No cinematic thunder, just daylight and paperwork. Justice, it turned out, was fluorescent and methodical. My attorney filed claims for the gouges across my car, the 4 tires she had shredded, the cost of repairs. Nathan submitted his own for the spider-webbed pane of glass she had cracked with that landscaping stone. Facts laid out as neatly as receipts. Marissa arrived in a rush of perfume and agitation, her hair styled as if the courtroom were another stage. She tried to breathe life into a counter-narrative, the same one she had rehearsed in voicemails and late-night texts. She said jealousy drove me to frame her, that the videos were edited, that neighbors had conspired, that Nathan's footage was coincidence stitched into conspiracy. Her confidence was steady, but confidence is only volume when the evidence is mute and immovable. The record was literal. Timestamps did not blink. Videos didn't squint or blur when inconvenient. Her own voice captured shouting my name, dragging steel across paint, hurling a stone into glass. No editing suite could invent that rawness. The judge wasn't cruel, she didn't need to be. She was concise, cutting through the noise with the authority of someone who had seen hundreds of louder collapses. Restitution was ordered. Deadlines were set. Warnings were spoken in a tone colder than any scolding. Sitting at the plaintiff's table, I felt something unexpected. Relief that justice was boring. After months of adrenaline and spectacle, boredom felt like a luxury. There were no crescendos, no plot twists, just the quiet certainty of cause meeting consequence. Ryan's name flickered once in the proceedings, mentioned like a ghost before being crossed off the page. He was no longer central, just collateral in the wreckage. When the session ended, I stepped outside onto the courthouse steps. The air felt ordinary, the way air should. Ordinary had become miraculous after living in a storm. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pose for photos or text triumph to anyone. I simply scheduled an appointment at the body shop and forwarded the restitution order to my insurer. I wasn't rebuilding as a hero. No headlines waited to crack. I was rebuilding as a man who preferred receipts to speeches, a man finally choosing structure over spectacle. And for the first time in months, I realized that was enough. Legal dissolution is not thunder. It's paper cuts. Envelopes shuttling back and forth like tired dancers. My lawyer sending one, hers returning another, each stamped page another step in choreography no one applauds. Somewhere in a clerk's office, a file number was inked, a date was stamped, and a future was rewritten in past tense. There was no dramatic soundtrack. No gravelly voice announcing the end of a marriage. just a calendar notification on my phone, a single word glowing on the screen, finalized. I sat with that word for a long time, finalized, not destroyed, not broken, not even ended, simply concluded and equations solved. Practical tasks followed. I blocked the last of our mutual contacts, keeping only the numbers needed for logistics until property division settled. I exported the shared photo album, every curated smile, every weekend trip we once believed proved us real. I tucked it into an external drive I had no intention of opening, then deleted the copy from my phone. Nostalgia, I realized, is a hallway lined with traps. Walk too far and you'll end up back at the beginning, disoriented and bleeding. My therapist once suggested a ritual. Write the letter you need, never send it. So I did. I thanked her for the good years because there were some. I forgave the version of myself who thought endurance was the same as love. And I wrote, I am not auditioning for blindness anymore. When it was finished, I folded the letter and slid it into a drawer destined to be cluttered with tax forms and grocery lists. A burial by irrelevance. That evening, I took a long walk without my phone. No pings, no notifications, no artificial urgency buzzing in my pocket, just the rhythm of my own footsteps and air unedited by anyone else's expectations. Divorce was not the failure. Pretending would have been. Recovery, it turned out, was both administrative and tender. I didn't reinvent myself overnight. I paid bills, renewed subscriptions, updated my address on forms that still listed our apartment. Each small task was irritating in its repetition, yet each one stitched me back into a life that finally belonged to me alone. I started cooking again, not because anyone was watching, but because hunger kept its own schedule. At first, eating for one felt stark, the silence at the table too loud. Then I realized how freeing it was to plate food without performance, to eat without curating. My new coffee mug wasn't a souvenir or a gift from her. It was a plain ceramic piece I had chosen simply because it fit well in my hand. I watered the plants I'd taken from the office, stubborn green survivors of neglect, and they rewarded me by staying alive. Their resilience mirrored my own, quiet and unglamorous but steady. I began meeting friends with intention, not as shields against loneliness, not as distractions from an empty room, but because I wanted to hear their stories again. Conversations felt lighter, no longer haunted by the need to defend or explain my marriage. At the gym, I added weight 5 pounds at a time. The bar moved slowly, cleanly. Progress wasn't dramatic, it was cumulative. Each rep whispered the same lesson: consistency is its own kind of revenge. At work, I volunteered to mentor a junior analyst. Guiding him through chaos, watching his spreadsheets take shape, reminded me that structure steadied not just him, but me as well. Teaching clarity gave me clarity. I didn't swear off love. That would let the past author my future. Instead, I swore off contracts rewritten without my consent. I swore off promises altered in silence. When someone asked if I regretted going public with what had happened, I answered honestly, I regret staying blind longer than I had to. The act closed on an ordinary evening. No drama, no headlines, just the sound of a fan spinning and a book half finished on the couch. Nothing special happened, and that finally was the point. Peace so unremarkable it felt extravagant. Months later, the storm had thinned into memory, and memory had softened into something I could touch without flinching. One evening, I sat at my desk with a pen in hand, the kind of ritual that slowed thought down just enough to catch it. The paper before me wasn't for sending, it was for closing. My therapist had called it the unsent letter. Tonight, I decided it would be the last one. I began with gratitude, strange as it felt. I thanked truth for being rude and perfectly on time. It hadn't whispered gently, it had kicked the door down. That was mercy disguised as cruelty. Then I sketched the doctrine I intended to keep for whatever came next. Say yes when you mean yes, say no when you mean no, and leave when the contract changes without your signature. 3 sentences, simple enough to memorize, sharp enough to guard a life. I thought about revenge. Most people imagine rage, broken plates, scorched earth, shouted finales. But that wasn't what I lived. My revenge had been clarity, disciplined into action. It wasn't the viral clip, though that burned briefly. It wasn't the court order, though that steadied me. The real payback was quieter, building a life that no longer required someone else's denial to make sense. In the letter, I acknowledged Marissa not as a villain, but as a catalyst. She had taught me my limits by crossing them, had handed me the map of myself by ignoring its borders. That was her legacy in my life, not the betrayal, but the boundaries it forced me to name. When I finished, I folded the paper and slid it into a folder marked closed, not trauma. Filing cabinets, I realized, make better tombs than hearts. I walked to the window. Morning smelled like rain, clean and expectant. I opened the panes and let the apartment breathe. Music played softly from a playlist I had made without irony. Between tracks, the silence was music too. The camera in my head, the one that had recorded every gesture for evidence, every smile for later interrogation, was finally off. Life no longer needed documenting to be trusted. The story didn't end with a kiss or a slammed door. It ended here, with a man who knew how to choose himself without apology. That was the freedom I had been chasing all along, even before I knew its name. And so the story of she said I'd never leave, but divorce and revenge shattered her perfect image comes to a close. In the end, betrayal didn't just break a marriage, it revealed a lesson. Love without respect is just leverage, and silence can be the sharpest revenge. But what about you? If you discovered your partner was hiding behind your loyalty, would you walk away or would you fight back? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. This is Cheating Stories 7, where every story reminds us that betrayal always carries a price. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this lesson today. Until next time, thank you for watching.